Hello, and welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Unfounded podcast, Take Me to Church series. This is going to be volume 10, I believe, actually. Getting to double digits here of the Take Me to Church series that we've been doing here. We're studying the Bible, going through it kind of chapter by chapter, very painstakingly slow, to try to learn about the Bible and to understand the stories within it in more depth. And more specifically, to not be told what those stories mean by something outside of ourselves, but to find it ourselves. So, for those of you that have been joining me up until this point, thank you for showing back up again. I know this is not necessarily always the most deeply entertaining episodes, right? They're kind of work, they're educational, right? So some of the episodes you have to think really hard. You have to do a little bit of work. And so if you keep on showing up here every week, give yourself some credit, because it's not just, it's not easy to access or to engage with this material. I know that myself, because before we get into the podcast this morning, I'll talk about kind of what I'm going through this morning. It's hard for me to do the show this morning. And yesterday, I've been kind of, like I said last week, trying to figure out how to produce it properly. And it's been hard motivationally today to get myself to do it, and which is frustrating, because this is something that I really enjoy, right? Making the podcast is something that I genuinely enjoy. And so when I come to a day where I'm not feeling too hot, or I'm not feeling, myself, and I also need to produce content, it adds another layer of difficulty. But this morning I'm trying to push through that, to see if there's anything on the other side of that frustration. Excuse me, as I just burp, right? So I do think there is some release going on with that message this morning. Excuse me. As you can tell, I've been passing a lot over the last couple of days. So partially what's frustrating for me is just the physical issues that I'm having and have been having for a long time. Trying to heal myself takes so much energy out of me every day, that oftentimes when I get to this part of my week where I've kind of prepared the whole week for just this specific thing, the podcast or music, I don't feel like I have the energy, because I've been working on making myself feel better the entire week. And I know that kind of sounds confusing, but I'm being guided to explain it, because there's an aspect of resilience that's coming through this morning that's necessary, that we see in the stories of Abram and Sarai, actually, kind of fittingly leading us into our chapters this morning. But that you have to have a certain type of faith if you want to create something, anything really. It doesn't really matter what it is. But that faith will be tested. And if you don't have the courage to walk through the fire in those moments, and to continue to carry the weight of whatever your burden you've chosen to carry, then you will fail. It will cease to be a thing. It's simple as that, really. So whatever your dream is, or whatever you want to create, or whatever you're doing right now that you're failing at doing, I'm being guided to tell you that the reason that you feel like you're failing is because you're giving up on yourself. It's a message for me as well. I'm not just speaking to anybody listening. That there's a tendency that I've had throughout my life. Oh, it's getting me emotional just thinking about it. That's how I know it's real. I sabotaged my life continuously. And this is a very delicate thing to explain, so I'm going to take some time to do this before we get into the stories this morning. For some reason, when you are traumatized in specific ways, or maybe non-specific ways, but maybe just trauma in general, one of the characteristics you can take on through that hurt, and I'm trying to sort through it right now and talk through it, so I don't necessarily understand it as an expert, I'm more trying to analyze it myself, that when you get deeply hurt, specifically if it's, I think, connected to something that is deeply rooted in you. So let's say if it violates some aspect of you that reflects your identity. For example, let's say you're a child and you make a painting, right? And you're really proud of your painting and you're getting excited about this skill or this talent that you see coming out of yourself. But then you go and show it at like a show and tell or something, right? And people judge it, people criticize it, people maybe even make fun of you, call you not a good painter. So that you take that internally, that becomes a trauma itself, and then you enact those lies out in the world so that you restrict yourself from creating those things that you think now are no longer worthy of the world. Because people have taken that willpower out of you, kind of beaten it out of you through a certain type of insecurity of their own, right? But what that will cause inside of you if you do not deal with the problem in the moment is a tendency to restrict yourself, I think. That's kind of a trivial example, but a tendency to restrict yourself anytime you get close to making something that really would reflect who you are. Because it means you're vulnerable again, right? It means that you're getting close to that point where somebody could really hurt you, could really touch a part in you that could make you crumble. And so I think anytime you are in a creative space or you are creating anything, working on a project of any sort, there is this point you'll come to where that you have to decide whether you want to push through it. And it's a certain type of fear, right? But it'll manifest as other emotions, other sensations. It'll manifest as frustration, depression, anxiety, annoyance, all of these other negative emotions will start to be amplified and then projected towards the creation that you are focusing on, which then is discouraging, right? So as you start to have these negative thoughts over what you're going to do or what you're going to be making, you start to discourage yourself, and then slowly over time, the willpower to even do the thing goes away. And before you know it, you're not making anything anymore. And as a matter of fact, you're getting more and more depressed because you're not able to express yourself anymore. And if you do that long enough, you'll forget who you are entirely, and you'll take on somebody else's identity. Specifically, if you don't deal with those traumas, identities like the people who hurt you, right? Because you'll want to protect yourself from the people who hurt you, and the best way to do that is to make yourself look like them, right? So this is a very powerful message coming through this morning, right? Anybody watching, I'm being guided to tell you to keep pushing. Don't give up, right? One of the other things that's happening right now in the world is in the United States at least, is the TikTok ban, right? And I'll do other episodes more in depth on these. Again, I like to keep it more oriented on the Bible in these shows, but I do think it's relevant this morning because last night, TikTok, and I really do believe TikTok chose to do this. They're doing this very intentionally to make the federal government look bad right now. Essentially, the entire idea that the government was afraid of TikTok being the idea that it could be a weapon used against the United States is coming into fruition as we speak. One of the examples being TikTok kind of shutting down the platform last night for a brief period of time, sending many people into panic, right? That being the point. All of these creators are being kind of tugged by political powers, right? And while there is a fundamental debate on freedom of speech at the center of this issue, one thing that I have recognized is that China, ByteDance, and TikTok in no way are fighting for freedom of speech. They may say they're doing that, but if you look at their platform, if you look at the fruit it produces, what it produces is censorship. More so than I've experienced on any other platform that I've been a part of. And I have a bigger following on TikTok than any other platform, right? So I think that there's something going on right now with the TikTok ban and with creators that's forcing them to look inside themselves and ask themselves, am I really creating what I want to create? Or am I creating what the algorithm tells me I should be creating? What I've started to realize is a majority of the content that is on TikTok is worthless. Not only worthless, some of it's degrading. Like I've seen some of the nastiest things I've ever seen on TikTok. While you can choose to scroll or not, there is something about the algorithm that tries to feed that nastiness into your feed. I'm sure you've seen it, right? And I think that's intentional. And I think that's partially why we're going through all the drama we're going through with TikTok right now. But that being said, if you are a creator and you are worried about your future with TikTok, recognize that if you are making good content and you are enjoying the content that you create, other people will enjoy that content as well. How many is up to find out. You got to go figure that out. But what I think has happened is TikTok has falsified that. I think TikTok has created a platform specifically designed to attract all of the attention from the other platforms through creating false views and funneling money towards those creators, so that they create content that is degrading to the United States itself and to the citizenry in the United States. And what I've witnessed is many people, through a variety of their own ideas, creating content that doesn't produce any good in the world. All it does is kind of make the person creating it more popular or more rich. And then we have a mass amount of people who are now calling themselves small business owners because they have started to make money making these worthless content. And the company that is paying them for that worthless content is TikTok. And that tells me that TikTok was very specifically trying to do what they've done. They've been trying to muddy the minds of American citizens and our interests, distract us, depress us, whatever else you can think of, so that we're moldable. So that when they decide to push that button, everybody switches over to Lemonade, right? Or whatever their other platform is. It's been highly manipulative, and I'm going to leave it there for now because I don't want to get too much into the TikTok subject and take me to church. But I just wanted to touch on that this morning before we get started, because I think a part of the reason I'm feeling the emotions I'm feeling this morning and the frustration of not wanting to start the creation process is because that's what people are feeling in the world now, specifically because of TikTok and its hazy future. What I'm here to tell you is, if you have been creating content that you enjoy, there are many other platforms out there, right? Many platforms that will give you as many views as you can find. You have to put yourself out there, right? It is not the same algorithm as TikTok. It is not the same platform as TikTok. That being said, I'm pretty sure at this point, TikTok wasn't real. Go look at all your followers. How many of them are accounts that are repeat accounts from other accounts, right? How many times did you have the real creator follow you? Or did you have some spam account who is imitating Elon Musk or one of these other creators following you? And then different versions of those. So how many of your followers are actually real people? That's what I'm trying to say here. I think TikTok was an illusion the entire time. And that's why the federal government is trying to ban them, because they knew that, because they have the data. They can tell behind the scenes what's actually going on, at least to some degree more than we can. So that, using that knowledge, they decided this is not a good thing for the United States citizenry, because it could cause all of them to be sent into a depression spiral at the very least. At the very most, it could radicalize them against the federal government and become and motivate them to become pro-China, which is exactly what is happening as we speak to most of the creators that I was just talking about. So, keep making content. Forget about TikTok. If it's here tomorrow, it's here tomorrow. If it isn't, it isn't. Trust in something higher, that something higher is at work here, right? And if you need to defend your freedom of speech, you will know when you need to do that, because it's a very, very specific feeling. As a matter of fact, TikTok is one of the only platforms that's made me feel a lack of freedom of speech in America. So that I know the Chinese Communist government gives zero shits about your freedom of speech. They're liars. They're sneaky fuckers is the way you could call it. And excuse me for my language, but these people need to be called out. All right. Let's get into it. This morning I have, we're going to be on I think we're on chapter 16 now. No, we're on chapter 17. We were at chapter 15 and chapter 16 last week. A lot of energy to start the podcast. Apologies again for the frustration, but there's a lot of frustration in the world right now, and understandably so, but also there's a lot of confusion and a lot of, it's a dangerous place in the world right now, because what TikTok is doing could get a lot of people into a lot of trouble. This is not a game, right? These creators that are jumping over to Chinese platforms, right? This is a country that is not friendly to the United States, probably the most unfriendly to the United States of any other country in the world, maybe save Iran or Russia, right? So that if you are starting to move all your content because you can't imagine not making money anymore or losing your followers to a Chinese platform that is literally in Mandarin, you are dancing a very thin line that if we were, heaven forbid, ever to get into any kind of broader conflict with China, guess who's first on the list to double check whether you're actually loyal to the United States or not? You could very quickly become a suspect of treason, which is exactly what I think you could become suspected of treason, which is exactly why I think they're doing what they're doing. They're compromising American citizens en masse. It's tragic. So let's leave that there because, as you can tell, I'm a little bit worked up on it. There's just not a lot of good perspective on it right now, unfortunately. Many people are losing their way, I guess. So let's recap chapter 15 and 16 really quick. Last week we were dealing with Abram and Sarai. Specifically, chapter 15, we have Abram talking to God. And Abram is at a low point in his life. He's worried that he's not going to have a child. He's been trying for years, and he recognizes that his wife is barren. And he knows that logically there's no way he could have a child in this way. And so he's begging God at this point. God, why have you not blessed me with a child? You've promised me this, right? And you can, in that chapter, really feel the despair because Abram is being tested. His faith is being tested in that moment. And it is not a fun place to be. And it is a lonely place to be. And it is where you forge faith. Faith is not something that comes by default. It is something that you hammer out yourself. And chapter 15 explains that process, describes it in a very specific way through a conversation that God has with Abram, reiterating his covenant with him and telling him essentially not to worry, right? Why would you doubt me? I am all-powerful. Then we move to chapter 16, and it shows a different form of kind of doubting from Sarai. Now, Sarai is getting, I think, she's disappointed that she can't provide this kind of fundamental facet of, a wife's role for her husband. And so she is trying to figure out how to remedy the problem, but she's trying to do it, she's trying to take the reins. Essentially, she's not trusting in God, that what God has said will come to fruition. So what Sarai decides to do, and it's very odd, but you could maybe understand it if you really put yourself in her position and recognize how long these people have been trying to have a child and how important it is in the time to have the patriarch, for there to be someone to pass the lineage onto, right? It's important now, but it was just as important back then. And this was more of an existential threat, because if the patriarch doesn't have any children, then it really throws the entire tribe into turmoil, right, leadership-wise. And so there's practical reasons for it as well. So Sarai recognizes this, but more specifically, I believe she recognizes that this is a big burden on Abram. And recognizing that Abram is a loyal husband, she knows that Abram won't go and find another wife or toss her to the side because she's barren. So she goes and suggests, hey, will you sleep with my maidservant so that we can have a child, so that I can have a child? She actually kind of explicitly says that she wants a child herself, and if she can't have one by her own loins, then she would rather have one anyway, right? Just have a child anyway. To get somebody pregnant, I think is what she says. And so she suggests this to Abram. Abram does not protest very hard. hardly at all, it doesn't seem like. It says something like he hearkens to the voice of Sarai. And then it does say that there's a brief period of waiting, like 10 years or so, but it's hard to tell how long that is in Genesis terms because the timeline's a little different in Genesis. So it's an interesting point in time where they may have waited, they may have not, but point being, Abram sleeps with Hagar, who is his Egyptian servant, Sarai's Egyptian servant. I believe she was Egyptian. And she becomes pregnant. And later in the chapter, we see essentially Sarai changing her mind. So after Hagar becomes pregnant, Sarai starts to really doubt why she did that. And specifically, I think she starts to become jealous. She becomes fearful that I think Abram will toss her aside as his wife for Hagar now that Hagar has the heir. And so Sarai basically verbalizes this to Abram and says, hey, I don't trust her. She's eyeballing me kind of things, right? And Abram says, look, like, you're my wife. She's not important to me in that way. I did this because you instructed me to. So do with her what you want. She's your maidservant. And then it speaks of Sarai dealing with her harshly. So she treats her very badly, enough to where Hagar runs off, right? Runs off into the desert. She comes upon a well. It's called the Zamzam well in the Islamic tradition, but I don't know if the Christian tradition has a name for it, but it's called the Zamzam well. And an angel of God appears before Hagar here at the Zamzam well and speaks to her, and basically has a different version of the covenant story that he enacts here, where he promises Hagar that her generations will be great and they will be filled with let me see here, I'll find the actual line here. It's right here. It says right here, and it says, and the angel of the Lord said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. So the Lord is answering her prayers. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Very, very interesting passage. I think a very important one moving forward. But that this is the message, the covenant of sorts. It's a different version of it, but it's a covenant. It's kind of an extension of the covenant through Hagar, because now that Hagar has, conceived with Abram, she is a part of that lineage now, regardless of how Sarai feels, right? And that was Sarai's choice. So you can't fault Hagar for this part, right? So Hagar is visited by this angel and consoled by this angel and told that you do not need to worry about Ishmael, your son, that you're going to call him Ishmael. First of all, it gives her the name to call her new son. And then also says that he will be prosperous in the sense of there will be a lot of offspring. He will have a large family. He will be free, is the way I take from the wild man part, right? This will be a vast reaching lineage. So very similar to your children will number the stars kind of conversation. But there is a difference, and it is in kind of, and his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. So it seems like this lineage will be in strife continuously moving forward. So this is like consoling, but also like the most honest type of consoling. Like, yes, don't worry about that part that you're worried about. You're going to have a son. You're going to be fine. We're going to take care of you. But your son's hand will be against every man, and every man's hand will be against these kind of things. And I'm trying to figure out why this is the case, because it doesn't seem like Hagar or Ishmael, obviously, did anything wrong, in that it was Sarai and Abram that did something wrong there. But I think what is happening here is there's an extension. So what I think we're seeing here is that slowly in Genesis, and this is just starting to form, this is because we're early in the book, but Genesis is taking different it's showing us examples of the way the world can be affected by your sin. And it's using the patriarch of the faith and his wife to demonstrate that even those people who are the God's favored in that sense, the one that God talks to directly all the time and has chosen in that sense to pass his lineage on, they can make mistakes. And they do, and they continually do. That's what these stories are actually about. The only part of these stories that we're reading is the parts where Abram and Sarai fuck up, right? Pretty big too. And Sarai really big here, right? And causes a lot of pain for other people. So that Hagar initially didn't do anything wrong, but there was a sin in the act that was committed. The same sin that was committed in Egypt with Sarai and the Pharaoh, right? So that now that Sarai is on the other side of that, and it's literally titled Sarai's jealousy, she becomes jealous. And in dealing with that jealousy, she lashes out and acts improperly, right? And that causes, from what we're seeing here, another break in the story, kind of a diversion, a fork in the road that really changes things. And I think what this is trying to illustrate is that you need to take yourself seriously and the sins that you commit very seriously, because you have no idea the people they touch, right? Sarai in the moment was not thinking about how she was affecting Hagar. She was thinking about her and Abram and their family and their future and God's covenant. But in that, she forgot to think about the person that she was using as a pawn to make a person, to get what she wanted, Hagar. She used her that way. And because she was motivated out of that low place, she allowed sin to enter her household and convinced her husband to commit the same act. It's a repeat of the story of the Garden of Eden. Now, this is not about blaming men or women, because as we talked about earlier, Abram's the first one that did this. Abram did it in Egypt, and he screwed up all of Egypt and cast them into wandering for like a decade or more, right? He really, really, really messed up. And even though they don't know this yet, also caused most of his lineage to be enslaved for 400 years through that sin, from what I'm seeing. Right, so big fork in the road, big, left turn. So Sarai does the same thing, and she has a big mistake as well, and she's learning through this. And this is before she's become Sarah, right? So we give her a little bit, we give her a little bit of space to be the best she can be for who she is at the time, I guess, right? And then try to take it for ourselves. And how can we learn from this, right? We're going to move forward here into chapter 17, and the story gets more interesting and even harder to explain as we go into chapter 17. But that's, I think, a good synopsis for now. Let's go ahead and dive into it here. We're on chapter 17, right down here at the bottom. And when Abram was 90 years old and 9, so he's 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God. Walk before me, and be thou perfect. Oh, interesting. And I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and thou shalt be a father of many nations. Neither shall thy name any more be called Abram, but thy name shall be Abraham. So this is where the change happens, right? He falls to his knees. So this is a different type of visitation that's happening here. You've seen Abram talking to God up until this point, but it's important when it says, and he falls to his knees, I think, because it's demonstrating this is a different level of interaction that's happening here. The reason that Abram is going from Abram to Abraham is because God has now routed out the parts of him that are imperfect, the parts that were Abram. So now there's nothing in the way anymore. So God or an angel comes to him and says, be thou perfect. There's nothing in the way, right? Act as who you are, as Abraham, because that's who you are now. There is no more Abram. Abram is dead. And so this is a death of sorts, and you see him falling to his knees to exemplify the power of the process that's going on. And I will make thee exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee, and to thy seed after thee. And I will give unto thee, and to thy seed after thee, in the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. And God said unto Abraham, Thou shalt keep my covenant before thou, and thy seed after thee in their generations. This is my covenant, which ye shall keep, between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every man child among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every man child in your generations, he that is born in the house or bought with money of any stranger, which is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house, and he that is bought with thy money must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the circumcised man-child, whose flesh of his foreskin is not circumcised, that shall be cut off from his people, he hath broken my covenant. And God said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. Ooh, it's interesting. So I didn't know that it was Abraham that is told that Sarah is now Sarai, or Sarai is now Sarah. And I will bless her, and give thee a son also of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto God, O that Ishmael might live before thee. And God said, Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Isaac, which Sarah shall bear unto thee at this time in the next year. Excuse me. And he left off talking with him, and God went up from Abraham now. I need to adjust the way I'm saying this. And Abraham took Ishmael, his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought, with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the self-same day. And God had said unto him, And Abraham was 90 years old and 9 when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the self-same day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael, his son. And all the men of the house, born in the house, and bought with money of the stranger, were circumcised with him. So that would not have been a fun day. I don't know about you guys, but I probably would have wanted to miss that one or call out sick. If you're a guy, you definitely understand. But this is an important chapter as well, because this is a very, very controversial part of the Bible, because many people often describe circumcision in the Jewish and the Catholic traditions as barbaric, right? Very archaic form of kind of brutalism, right? And I'm here to argue against that, right? Because it is laid out here why this is happening, and it is not simply some crazy man. I believe it's not. I don't believe that it's simply some crazy man out there wanting to be somewhat perverted with the people that he's around. I think this is obviously, as God is describing, a physical example, an embodiment of the covenant. And you can think of a covenant as a ring. That's why we wear rings as like wedding rings, right? But that the foreskin of the circumcision of the foreskin is also a ring. And this is a physical burden that you have to carry. You have to literally go through, right? A pain of sorts that will be physically affixed to you perpetually so that you remember that covenant, right? Because what we've seen here is that the covenant is being forgotten a lot, right? Keeps on being forgotten. Sarah forgets it, Abraham forgets it, and I'm sure everybody else is forgetting it at different points too. So God wants to make this solidified in the world. And the way he chooses to do it, or it chooses to do it, is through circumcision. Now, whether you agree with that or not, it's not my place to judge, right? I believe that this is here for a reason, and there's a reason that people modern days still do it, right? I'm not necessarily here to judge whether I think it should still be done or not, right? I believe that this is the word of God speaking and the reasoning for why it happened. And I think what the point is that the covenant needs to be embodied continuously. And the reason it says that 8 days, it's God rests on the seventh, and then the first day of the next week after you've been created, you start with this remembrance of the covenant, of why you're here, because there's something about this place that makes us forget. And you know this. Where did you come from? You can't remember, right? We always forget. There's something about this place that just keeps you, what am I doing here? So the circumcision in the Jewish tradition, in the Catholic tradition, is a embodiment of that, a remembrance of that. Albeit a very brutal one that does have reasoning behind it. So let us move on. Because I think that's about all we need out of the that chapter. But it is very important to understand why God is doing, why circumcision exists. And it is like I said, it's to represent that covenant, that unbroken circle, right? That because men are in the Bible, biblically, supposed to lead the family through whatever trials they're going to go through, they are chosen to be the ones to carry that burden, that scar, so that they constantly remember what their responsibility is, what their covenant is to God and their people, right? It's very important, actually. Chapter 18. And the Lord appeared unto him in the plains of Mamre, and he sat in the tent door in the heat of the day. And he lifted up his eyes and looked, and lo, 3 men stood by him. And when he saw them, he ran to meet them from the tent door, and bowed himself towards the ground, and said, My Lord, if now I have found favor in thy sight, pass not away, I pray thee, from thy servant. Let a little water, I pray you, be fetched, and wash your feet, and rest yourself under the tree. And I will fetch a morsel of bread, and comfort ye your hearts. After that ye shall pass on, for therefore are ye come to your servant. And they said, So do as thou hast said. And Abraham hastened into the tent unto Sarah, and said, Make ready quickly 3 measures of fine meal, knead it, and make cakes upon the hearth. And Abraham ran unto the herd, and fetched a calf tender and good, and gave it unto a young man. And he hasted to dress it. And he took butter and milk, and the calf which he had dressed, and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree, and they did eat. And they said unto him, Where is Sarah, thy wife? And she said, Behold, in the tent. He said, Behold, in the tent. And he said, I will certainly return unto thee according to the time of life. And lo, Sarah, thy wife, shall have a son. And Sarah heard it in the tent door, which was behind him. And Abraham and Sarah were old and well stricken in age, and it ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of the woman. Therefore Sarah laughed within herself, saying, After I am waxed old shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also. And the Lord said unto Abraham, Wherefore did Sarah laugh, saying, Shall I of a surety bear a child, which am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the time appointed I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Then Sarah denied, saying, I laughed not, for she was afraid. And he said, Nay, but thou didst laugh. And the men rose up from thence, and looked toward Sodom, and Abraham went with them to bring them on the way. And the Lord said, Shall I hide from Abraham that thing which I do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him, and they shall keep the way of the Lord, to do justice and judgment, that the Lord may bring upon Abraham that which he hath spoken on him. And the Lord said, Because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous, I will go down now, and see whether they have done altogether according to the cry of it, which is come unto me, and if not, I will know. And the men turned their face from thence and went toward Sodom. But Abraham stood yet before the Lord. And Abraham drew near and said, Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked. That be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? And the Lord said, he's kind of stepping out of his place there, Abraham. And the Lord said, If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, and I will spare all the place for their sakes. And Abraham answered and said, Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, which am but dust and ashes. Good job humbling yourself there, because you were getting a little bit out of line there, very close. Peradventure, there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Wilt thou destroy all this city for lack of 5? And he pushes a little harder. Abraham's getting a little ballsy here. And he said, If I find there 40 and 5, I will not destroy it. And he spake unto him yet again, and said, Peradventure, there shall be 40 found there. And he said, I will not do it for 40's sake. And he said unto him, O let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Peradventure there shall be 30 found there. And he said, I will not do it, if I find 30 there. And he said, Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord. Peradventure, there shall be 20 found there. And he said, I will not destroy it, for 20's sake. And he said, O let the Lord not be angry, I will speak yet but this once. Peradventure, 10 shall be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for 10. And the Lord went his way, as soon as he had left communing with Abraham, and Abraham returned unto his place. All right. So we're going to pause there for a second. Interesting section there. I didn't realize that was the one that was coming up. I, for some reason, thought that the section of the casting out of Hagar and Ishmael was coming up next, but I skipped over some very important parts. So this is an interesting chapter as well, because this is another. So now we're going from chapter, what was it? Where we at? 17. Yeah, there's a long chapter. So in chapter 17, we have Abraham getting his name, right? Or is it? Yeah. So in chapter 17, you have Abraham getting his name and Sarah getting their name. So there's this shift that we went over, right? That now they're different. They're different figures, actually different figures. If you look at the way they act and the way they speak moving forward, they're going to act differently. And one of the last facets of Sarah's kind of doubting you see in this laughing part of the story in chapter 18. So what's happening here, and this is kind of confusing in chapter 18, the way it's described. What happens here and what they're trying to describe is a visitation by 3 angels, right? Now, it says that the Lord speaks to them, but in many times in the Bible, especially in Genesis, you're going to see the Lord speaking through emissaries, right? So it'll speak through Gabriel or one of the angels. It usually doesn't name the angel. I would assume it's probably Gabriel most of the time, unless it's a very specific thing that it's doing, But there's other versions of angels, but angels have different purposes, right? And one of the things that Gabriel is a message bringer, right? The message bringer for God. And so one of them. And so you can, the archangel of that. And so you could imagine maybe like Gabriel and like Raphael or a couple of other angels, these 3 angels coming down, and they come to Abraham. Abraham immediately recognizes them. These are being described as physical beings. So this is not something going on in Abraham's head anymore, right? In the previous chapter 17, there's no description of something he's talking to. It's disembodied still, right? So it's Abraham is having a conversation with God, but God is not standing in front of Abraham, right? Now in chapter 18, God is standing in front of Abraham, and it's 3 different versions of God, right? It's 3 angels representing the Trinity. There's a lot of depth there, right? But then he comes, and what they do is he immediately just recognizes the divinity of these beings, right? He recognizes they're not just regular human beings, even though they look that way. So he runs up to them and he kind of very reverently says, "Please rest yourself, wash your feet, I'll feed you, let's talk," right? And they agree, and they all go sit under a tree. And he goes to Sarah, tells her to make some food, prepare, be a good host. She does that, but then she's also very curious about what these people are going to be talking about. So she's kind of sitting with her ear to the door, as you've seen in many movies, listening. And Abraham's talking to these angels, and they're telling Abraham of what's going to happen and reassuring Abraham first that they're going to have a child. Sarah's going to have a child, and by next year, very specifically, they gave her a time frame. You're going to have a child, right? So this is a clarification. This is now becoming real. And isn't it funny that there's a translation happening from Abraham having to carry that belief purely internally, because all of these conversations were happening purely internally. So he had to not only believe for himself, but then convince other people this is real. Now he doesn't have to do that anymore. It's been translated into reality. He has 3 physical beings of God sitting in front of him, talking to him, so he knows he's not crazy anymore, right? And not only that, but the message they're bringing is your dream, the thing that we fashioned your faith through, your desire for a child, it's now real 1 year from now. They give him a date. So this is a process of translating dreams into reality. It is the process of faith being fashioned, right? This is the process of awakening described. So if any of you are going through or have experienced similar things, similar quirks to what Abraham and Sarah experienced, then recognize you're on the same path. Right? Maybe not exactly the same one. You're not going to be father of all of these nations, right? But you have some purpose. God makes a covenant with every single person when they come here. You have a covenant that's just as important as Abraham and Sarah's. But you forgot it, just like they did. Right? So you got to remember. You got to remind yourself. Doesn't mean you have to circumcise yourself. Right? Just to put that out there. Don't have to take that step, I don't think, right now, unless you feel called to it. But you do need to remind yourself. Figure out whatever calls to you, whatever speaks to you, of remembering. There's different ways to do this, different spiritual ways to do this, through meditation, through prayer. Right? But whatever tradition you follow, there's a version of that in it that tries to get you to remember what you are. Right? Yeah. So the angels give him this timeline, and when they give Abram this timeline in a year, Sarah's like, she's like, she hears this and she laughs out loud. Like, yeah, okay. In a year, I'm going to be pregnant. I'm 90 years old. He's 100. He's 99. We ain't getting pregnant is kind of how she's acting, right? And they hear her, And they call her out, and she comes out, and they basically say, hey, look, why were you laughing? And she's like, she denies it. She says, I didn't laugh. And the angel basically says, yes, you did, but don't doubt, right? It's this very firm, almost parental, like, hey, you're not going to get away with anything. I know you laughed, and I know why you laughed, and that was doubting. Don't do that again, because I'm here to tell you it's real, right? You're going to doubt me when I'm right in front of you now, kind of a thing. So there was a little bit of aggression in that. Sarah, it's time to believe. That's what you fought for. I'm sitting in front of you. Believe, right? Something like that. So then the next part, so after we get that part out of the way, and they've kind of brought the message that I think they meant to bring to Abraham, they get up and say, it's now time to go to do the rest of the work we're here for. And they turn to Sodom and Gomorrah. And they kind of foreshadow that there's some bad things going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. They've heard the cry. The Lord has heard the cry of the people in Sodom and Gomorrah and is tired of seeing the pain and the suffering, whatever is going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so he's going to answer the call. And his first reaction is he's going to smite Sodom and Gomorrah, right? It's a very similar reaction that you see in the floods, right? But this is such a curious part of the Bible. Abraham, feeling all confident now that he's going to have an heir, right, decides that he's going to challenge God on that a little bit. And I love this part because it's demonstrating the relationship, that a proper relationship with God. It is not about obedience. While you do have the circumcision aspect and stuff, and these are about remembering or reminding you what the deal you made is, it's not about being completely subservient. Because God created you for a very specific purpose. Created you with all that audacity, if you do have the audacity to say what Abraham says here in the following lines, right? But he challenges God. You're going to smite that city? What if there's 50 good people in the city? Are you still going to smite them? God's like, no. If there's 50 people, I won't smite. What about 40? I guess 40, I still don't want to smite them. Yeah, 40s. I won't. If there's 40 of them, I won't smite. On and on and on, all the way down. He keeps pushing. Right? And he gets all the way down to, what's the last one? 10's sake. So what we end up is basically God makes a deal, these angels make a deal with Abraham that they will not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah if they can find 10 good, righteous people there. And we'll leave the rest of the story for a future time frame here in next week, probably, because I think that's enough chapters for this week. But what's so interesting about that is like I said, that there's a dialogue going on, that Abram is being very direct with God, and he's not just accepting what God is saying, he's applying the principles that God has kind of, I think, spoken to him at times to God also. So there's a dialogue going on here. Like I've said before, I believe that Genesis is describing an evolutionary relationship between a creator and its creation. So that the creator itself, while it may be all-powerful in relation to the created thing, it is not all-powerful in totality, and it does have limitation, but those limitations are so grand that the created thing can't imagine it. So that the creator has to essentially guide the created thing through the description of what the creator is. Imagine if you couldn't see your parent, but the parent was still there and taking care of you. How would the parent tell you that I'm here, right? Through this certain type of dialogue, through kind of a photonegative way, right? But you see it exemplified in the story of Abraham. So, I think that's what I got for this week, guys. I don't have too much more. Honestly, it's a little bit of a shorter episode. I kind of want to leave it there, and we'll come back and chew on more next week. Just know, and before we take off here, just know that the world is going to get crazy, especially today and tomorrow. It's starting to get really crazy, and you are being asked to hold yourself together. As I keep on repeating every week, but this is the repeated message. Hold yourself together and focus on who you are. Try not to sin in your own life. Don't focus on the ways that other people are sinning externally, right? Because that will cause you to sin yourself, to miss the mark yourself. If you're focusing on how everybody else is, focus on what you want to hit. right? If you're shooting an arrow, what do you focus on? The target. Don't focus on other people shooting, right? Because you're going to hit them or you're going to miss the target for sure. Focus on the target. Focus on what you want to do, what you want to create, what you want the world to be, what you like in the world, what you think is beautiful about it, what makes you laugh. All of these positive things, focus on that and shoot your arrow and you'll hit the target. You might not bullseye it, but you'll get closer and closer, right? That's what this is all about. Social media creators, influencers, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling depressed, this is not the end of the world. This is a change that is needed. There has been deception in our world. And just because you are losing a certain amount of following at the moment or are worried that you might, doesn't mean you don't have the ability to create that following everywhere else. If you created it one place, you should be able to create it another one. If you argue against that, then I'd ask you, why does one place offer you more opportunity for views than another? That would seem that that place might have some other motive or some other finger on the scale creating those inflated views relative to the other ones, right? So there's this process going on where you need to really focus on, what do you want to make? What do you want to do if you're not making anything? But what do you want to do? And how do I do that while also enjoying it, right? While also being in the moment doing it? Because half the time we'll end up doing something and we'll be somewhere else while we're doing the thing that we want to do. This is more common in the modern world than it used to be because of cell phones and things, but you go out and people are videotaping things that they're never going to watch. Go to like a light show, right? Or a fireworks are the perfect ones that people usually use as an example. People taking videos of fireworks. Have you ever shown a video of fireworks to anybody after you've taken the video of them or the picture, or have you even looked at it, right? There's this, I don't even know why I brought that up at this point. I'm kind of bouncing all over the place. Point being, do what you want to do. Make what you want to make. If a platform doesn't allow you to say it, if a platform shuts down, if a platform goes away, whatever it is, find a new platform. There's plenty of them out there, right? Don't let yourself degrade, because I think that's exactly the point of what's going on right now, is to try to get people to degrade. And that is very revealing. Because what comes after that faith is what we're starting to see in the story of Abraham, right? Their faith is paying off. You're about to see Abraham have a son. This is his wish fulfillment, his dream, the biggest thing he ever wanted. That was impossible. They're 100-year-old people. If she's wasn't barren to begin with, she is now, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? So believe that kind of miracle can happen in your own life, I think, is another aspect of this story. You have to try to see that in your own life. That is faith. If you can't see it, you're not building faith, right? You're not doing that work. It takes the kind of work that you see, people on their knees, speaking, praying to God, begging for help, that you see Abraham going through and Sarah going through. So, and Hagar, right? One thing that I found really interesting before I let you go this week, guys, is just contemplating the chapters we read last week, how we just got in the Bible to the point where the Islamic faith is introduced, the patriarch of the Islamic faith. It was the first week. And what happened last week, guys? The ceasefire. I'm not saying this podcast did that. That's quite obvious it didn't. I am saying we're aligned with something energetically, right? That there's something about the story of the Bible that is so powerful, right? That it reveals itself in line with the world you live in now. What? How does a book written thousands of years ago by 60 or 70 different people at different periods of time, hundreds of different people really, right? How does that accurately describe things you're going through in a modern society that is so disconnected from the time frame in which it was written that those people would think you were an alien if you stood in front of them? Yeah, it can describe what's going on around us in our world. As a matter of fact, it can almost predict it. So that's a good thing. That the brothers are coming together again, at least trying to, in a very, very minimal way. It's a step that direction instead of a step that way. And I'm happy about that. And I hope you are too, regardless of what side of that conflict you fell on, to know that the end is in sight. And that maybe it won't go as bad as could be humanly imaginable. That maybe it could go the other way. That maybe the Abraham Accords or things like that, ideas like that, peace can really flourish in the Middle East. Real peace, not political peace, not talking points, not tropes, not lies. A family reunion. That's what needs to happen. And I think it's starting. Anyway, I don't really have anything on Grok. I did have another camera angle, but I didn't really feel compelled to use Grok today, guys. I just wanted to keep it simple and get through the chapters and get whatever I'm feeling out to. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Apologies for the little bit of cussing and stuff that was in there. I try to avoid that in the church episodes just because of the topic, but I do think it is fitting to not filter yourself too much, right? There is a reason those words exist, and it's because they imbue a certain amount of power into what you're saying, right? So that you should use those kind of words very carefully and very specifically, but that there are certain scenarios in which they are necessary to demonstrate the force. So that I hope you understand that when I use any type of curse word in specifically this show, it is not meant to be disrespectful to anybody watching or to a higher power. It's actually meant to exercise that freedom of thought and speech that I think a higher power would have imbued in me, or is imbuing in me in that moment. And to not judge too harshly. So, that being said, I send you all a lot of love. I want to thank you for joining me here on this episode of Take Me to Church. And we will be back on here next week with another one. Lots of love. Bye-bye.